This year marked the 65th anniversary of the founding of China's Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. It will be fair to say that this region is a very different place now than it was 6 decades ago. But let's face it, there are numerous challenges as well. What is life in Xinjiang like? How do you compare the Western narratives versus Beijing's own narrative about the region? And now, who better to talk to than two people with first-hand experience from Xinjiang? Jerry Gray is an Australian expat currently living in China's Guangdong province who visited Xinjiang multiple times, and Anaerguli Awuti, an English teacher at Hainan Foreign Language School who grew up in Xinjiang. Welcome both, but first of all, let's take a look at some data. From 2014 to 2019, the GDP of Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region rose from around $135 billion to $200 billion, with an average annual growth rate of 7.2%. Per capita disposable income, a gauge of how well off people can be, has been growing at a rate of 9% annually. Anaerguli, you were born and raised in Xinjiang. You lived there for over 20 years. What was it like growing up in the region, and how do you see the changes taking place over the decades?
I think I will start with people's life here. As we all know, some areas in Xinjiang is highly developed. For example, Urumqi is highly developed, just like some cities in eastern China. But some remote rural areas are still on the way of development. And talking about the change, I think we can see more change in these remote areas, because now I am from a small county of Gurkhan, and comparing to what it was like 10 or 20 years ago, now it was a new outlook. We all moved into new houses. Almost all the children can go to senior high school and they can go to college.
Jerry, how do you look at the changes taking place in Xinjiang? You've visited the region multiple times over the years.
Yeah, the first time I went there was 2005. That was just a very short holiday, and it was quite undeveloped. Recently, I traveled through there on a bike in 2014 and again in 2019. The first trip was traveling from the east coast west, and the second trip we flew into Urumqi and then traveled out. So what I saw is a very different city to the first time in 2005, and a much improved from 2014 to 2019.
Right. I want to show you this figure. In 2019, the number of tourist trips Xinjiang received exceeded 200 million, and tourism revenue reached $50 billion. That is a year-on-year increase of 40%. How do you make of those numbers?
I think probably most of those numbers would come from Chinese people traveling to that part of the country. There seems to be a fear that Xinjiang is a dangerous place. It's not. It has been in the past, but it's certainly not now. The figures will obviously increase more because Xinjiang has such an incredible amount of diversity. It has the deserts, it has the grasslands, it has mountains. It has everything that you want. It's as big as most of Europe, in fact. And I think probably the diversity is what keeps people going back. There is no fear anymore. There are some complications with being there, but there's no difficulty in going there. And that's probably the main thing that I would point out to anybody who thinks, I would like to go, but A, it's too dangerous, or B, I'm a foreigner and I'm not allowed. You are allowed. You can go. I've traveled in and out of Xinjiang several times now, and nobody's tried to stop me. I haven't received any special permits, any special visas. When anybody asks me, how do you get to Xinjiang? I say, you buy a ticket. Or in my case, you ride a bike there. There is no difficulty going there, and that's probably why those figures are increasing. People are realizing, A, the diversity and the beauty of the place, and B, the safety of it. It really is a very safe place. And there's a good selection of wines and beers are made there. People think it's a Muslim area, so it's dry. It's not at all. Many of the Muslims are involved in making wine, and it's very, very good. And a
Right.
lot of the dry fruit, the raisins and sultanas that we get around the world come from that area too.
Right, trust me, I had the best kebab and also the da parji, the slow-cooked chicken with a potato over there. Best by far, by far. Anar, let me go to you. Over the past 6 decades, you know, our guest Jerry talked about diversity over there. Xinjiang is not just made up of ethnic Uyghurs and plus Han Chinese, right? It is more than just that. I mean, it is a place of dozens of ethnic minorities.
Many ethnic minorities in Xinjiang, and we can't feel strong ethnic identity here because people all treat each other as a family. And in Xinjiang, I can't feel like I am a different one. For example, like in 2016, like our village is building new houses, so there are many like 10 workers in our village. So my father and my brother can speak little Mandarin Chinese, so they become friends. And the 10 workers will come to our house and we eat together. We spend many times together, and because my parents are farmers, so sometimes they will come to our home and like help with us like farmer workers. So like this is a really sweet memory, and every time when I was in like Xinjiang, I can feel my ethnic identity. I'm just a person. I'm just a person.
Yes, a fascinating place. I would like to go back. I mean, I've been there only once. It's certainly not enough. Let's talk about poverty, Jerry. From 2014 to 2019, officials in China say more than 2.9 million people out of the 3 million residents there have been lifted out of poverty. And the incidence of poverty, the rate of poverty dropped from 19% in 2014 to just 1% in 2019. But certainly there are lots of challenges, like we've heard from our friend who grew up in Xinjiang, the uneven growth and the rural areas. What are the progress as well as the challenges in Xinjiang when it comes to poverty alleviation?
I think the greatest challenge is its size. There are people who live many, many miles, many kilometers outside of the city. It's very hard to get them involved in services. Your training schemes that are going on, and this is what the Western world seems to not really appreciate. You've got some fantastic training schemes going on, getting people off the farms and into the cities. But of course, because their farms are maybe 100, 200 kilometers from a city, then the schools are boarding schools, and then they become, they get this title of being camps or prisons or worse. The fact is that they're boarding schools because many people will have to travel for long distances to get there. That's probably the greatest challenge, education and improving people's life standards, which comes along with education. So if you've got a child, and I'm not sure what Anna's situation was, but she traveled from a farm to a school, and obviously then from that school to another school in another city. That's the opportunities that people are getting. They learn to speak the language that is the national language. It's much broadly spoken outside of Xinjiang. Although nowadays, when I first went there, the Uyghur language was more common, but it's certainly still very, very active. A little bit like my own family here in Guangdong. My mother and father-in-law can speak Mandarin, but not very well, certainly not fluently. But their children, my wife and her sisters, can speak fluently because they're from that generation that had the opportunity to learn, whereas my parents-in-law didn't. We have that kind of challenge in Xinjiang. I think the environment is quite harsh in some areas. The distances between cities can be extremely long, several hours of driving, or a couple of hours of flying to get from one side of Xinjiang to the other. And that would create the biggest challenge for any government that is trying to improve the lives of people. If they're living 5-6 hours drive from a city and don't have a car, they'll never visit that city, of course.
True, very true over there. Jerry Gray and Anaerguli Awuti, I want to thank you both for being part of today's discussion.